Okay, so I just want to welcome everybody. It's 9 o'clock, so I first heard Navia and Carson's poetry at the last board meeting. They're students of board member Jenny, who teaches at Roy High School. And I was so moved by their poetry and the way in which their poetry kind of describes their actual experiences at school. I thought it was a really important way to start out a meeting so that we could focus on why we're all working so hard together, which is, to benefit students. So I'm going to turn it over to Navia and Carson. Do you want to unmute yourself and put your picture on so we can see your beautiful face?
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can see you and hear you.
Hi. Okay, so I will start out. Hi, my name is Nevaeh Parker. I'm so honored to get the chance to speak with you all today, so thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm just going to say a little bit about me. So I'm biracial. I'm mixed with Black, Mexican, and white. I'm going into 10th grade at Roy High. Woo, go Royals. I've been involved with student government since 7th grade, and I've been president and in the presidency of my young women's group in my church since I was 12. This summer, I've been babysitting, working on writing poetry, hanging out with friends, and sleeping in, of course. I am passionate and an advocate for human equality and fighting to end racism. I'm hoping to help others find their voice and feel accepted no matter what they look like. I'm a youth activist in training right now, but in the future, I'm hoping to become a lawyer and an activist.
Okay, so hi guys, my name is Carson Byard. I'm an upcoming sophomore at Roy High this year as well, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity to be here today. So I'm Hispanic, South Korean, and white. And I spent the summer playing comp softball and volleyball to prepare for the upcoming high school seasons. I'm busy this summer with my job, in which all my money has gone towards shopping with Nevaeh. I love spreading awareness about human rights issues. I'm very passionate about helping and supporting the people around me. I hope to one day become a therapist to help make a difference in somebody's life. And today I hope that we can help you understand some of the things that people go through regularly in school. People of color, sorry. Thank you so much for allowing us to be here today.
Okay, and then we'll just jump right into it.
Dear teachers,
I am not an angry Black girl.
I am not a loud Latina girl, and I am not the cause of the virus. It's a Chinese virus or a Kung flu. It's a novel virus that affects us all.
I'm tired of the N-word being thrown around like a ball. It is not a game of catch. I'm not a thug.
I'm tired of racism being normal. I'm tired of proving my intelligence. I am not smart just because I am Asian.
I wish people didn't question my presence in an important space and make me feel out of place, or tell me that I am pretty for a person of the Black race.
I wish stop telling me to eat my dog or to go back to Mexico.
I want teachers to know that it hurts when we feel as if we aren't as liked or respected by you because of how we look. There is nothing we can do. We all need to be equal. It doesn't matter if I am Black, brown, or blue.
I want teachers to stop normalizing racism in the classroom.
I need to know that you are here to help when we need your hand.
I want to know how much racism affects people of color, and it doesn't go unnoticed when you don't do anything about racists.
I need to hear the laughter in the halls rather than racist comments throughout the walls.
I need to hear that you are with us and that you stand with us and for us.
We want to say thank you to all of the mentors and teachers who go the extra mile and make us feel worthwhile. You guys are lifesavers, it's true. We appreciate all that you do. Please know that this is not just a trend. We need to see racism come to an end. It is time for a change. The world is hateful enough. School shouldn't have to be that way. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking your time to spend with us, and we hope that you recruit other students from Roy to share their poetry with us. And you have my, we've been texting back and forth, so just text me and let me know. I'm going to send you a link to our website so you can actually see when we have meetings. And then I'll leave it to you to recruit kids, and then you just tell me. Okay?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye. So I thought this would be a good way, again, to focus us in relationship to why adults, and especially educators, have the privilege of working to support young people in making their dreams come true. So I just want to thank all of you for being here and being an open-hearted audience for these two wonderful poets. So thank you so much. We're changing the agenda a little bit because Megan Lopez is here and Melanie Durfee. And so, you know, most of you know Megan because she's this amazing assessment person and does WIDA and is so kind and generous. And she's a good example for me to be kind and, you know, not so much an angry Latina, whatever that's supposed to mean. And so she's only here with 10 minutes for 10 minutes. And then Melanie, wonderful Melanie, who took over the responsibility in digital teaching and learning with her team for the EL software. I know there have been lots of questions about that, and she'll kind of explain where we are with that interesting experience. So we're going to start with Megan, and then we're going to do Melanie. And Megan is going to pretty much be open to questions. She'll do like a really brief thing about the remote WIDA screener. And on your agenda, there's actually a link to her full presentation and her PowerPoint slides that she did with Anne Michelle. So Megan, I'm going to turn it over to you, sweetheart.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Christelle. And I could never consider you angry. I consider you passionate, and I appreciate the passion you bring. So good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the new school year, this crazy school year. So although I do not have a formal presentation, my one big announcement, which hopefully you guys will all be very excited about, is we actually just last week got the WIDA reports in the data gateway. So this is the earliest they've ever been available in the data gateway. So we're really excited about that. Yay! So if you have any questions or concerns, let us know. And also just remember that every school has a data gateway kind of administrator, or kind of the key master, I guess, for your data gateway. If you don't have the correct permissions in data gateway to see the students that you need to see, make sure that you are speaking with that person at your site, because at the state level, I don't have access to be able to grant those permissions. So make sure that you contact those people, but do let us know if you have any questions or concerns when accessing those reports or taking a look at them. So they are available now. Start taking a look at them. Yay. And then as far as the remote screener goes, as Christelle said, she did put the link in for the presentation. If you have any questions, just reach out. And please, I feel like I say this all the time, but I mean it. I get so many apology emails by saying, I know you're so busy. I'm sorry to bother you. Don't ever apologize. It's my job to help you and support you. So do not hesitate. And don't feel like you need to apologize. So reach out if you have questions. Everything is available now for the remote screener in your WIDA secure portal account. So you do not need to order anything. Everything is there ready to be printed off. Also, just remember though that the remote screener is provisional. So it does not replace the KWAPT or the screener online. It's just provisional. So eventually, when you can do screening in person again, you will need to give the screeners. Okay. So with that, I want to open it up for any questions that people may have before I have to scooch on over to our assessment directors meeting today.
So if there are any questions, you can just unmute yourself and ask Megan. So Christy Wagner says thanks.
You are so welcome. I don't know if I'm deserving of a thanks. I feel like IT gets all the big thanks because they got on stuff really well and fast this year.
Well, I opened the chat and it doesn't look like there are any questions. And remember that the link to the students, the actual supporting students learning English is a playlist with all the most current presentations, and that's for the remote screener presentation that Megan and Anne Michelle did. That's where you can locate that. Okay, Megan, thank you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, and best of luck starting off the year. You guys are just my heroes. Thank you for being out there in the field. I cannot say how much you are so appreciated by us at the state. Reach out. Thank you, Christelle. And
thanks, Megan.
And you guys now get to hear from one of my favorite USBE people also, Melanie. She's kind of my fun partner in crime here and there at USBE.
Thanks, Megan. Have a good day.
You too.
Okay, so now we're gonna turn it over to Melanie. And Melanie, I just want to thank you for taking your time to come in person. And of course, this is recorded as well, so it'll be helpful when we send out the link. So do you want to just kind of give a brief background in relationship to the EL software? I think as most people know, or maybe they don't know, that the Imagine Learning contract ended in December of 2019. So I'll do that and then I'll turn it over to Melanie. So I don't really have anything to do with it because it just made way more sense for all the contracts for software to be in teaching and learning with a digital teaching and learning team, because that's actually their job. And so they have a great opportunity to look at the way in which digital teaching is impacting students, especially students, English learners. So Melanie.
Thanks. Oh. Okay, thank you, Christelle. I appreciate that introduction. And I totally agree with Christelle. It makes a lot more sense for digital teaching and learning to be managing this program. I also manage the early interactive software program. So you might see my name multiple times if you are the LEA representative for that program as well. As Christelle said, the Imagine Learning contract was up in December, and we thought that it made no sense to find a different vendor for the second half of the year. So we just extended Imagine Learning's contract 6 months. And then in the spring, we held an RFP, and we had several experts of the field on the RFP committee, and we selected Elevation Education. And then shortly after that, the program was defunded by the legislature. The EL Software Initiative program was defunded. And then on August 20th, let's see, when's August 20th? Oh, that's right now. A special legislative session was called. It's the 6th one this year. And in this session, they will discuss EL Software Initiative. It's on the agenda, and we should know by the end of today whether or not EL software is funded. So I am going to jump back. After I'm finished here, I'm going to jump back and listen to that session and see what they decide. And then I will send you out notification as soon as I figure out what it is we're going to do. I'm really excited that I get to be here today because I want you to see my face. I want you to see my name. When you get an email from me, I want you to know that it's not spam. It's somebody who's really trying to help, and I'm trying to help figure out these things. I heard what Megan said when she said, please don't apologize for contacting me. It's my job. And I just want to reiterate that. If you have any questions, if the wording of any of the emails is confusing, if you think that your special LEA situation might not apply in the same way that everybody else's does, if you can't find the email that I sent that everyone's talking about, please reach out. It's my job to help you with this initiative. And even if you just have complaints, those are really good for me to know, because since I'm in the digital world, not necessarily the Title III world, there might be things I just don't understand. So I would hope that you would feel free to reach out, and I'm excited to have some open communication on this. That's a lot of information. What questions do you have?
Okay, so there are some questions actually in the chat. Let's see. So there are a lot of thank yous. The question is, can you tell us about Elevation, what it offers? And then Robert Williams is saying, with Imagine Learning offering their program for free, with the caveat if the LEA receives software funding to purchase the license. What are the implications? My understanding is local district isn't receiving funding. Is that correct?
I don't know. It may turn out to be that way, that each LEA gets their own funding to purchase what they want. But I won't know that until the end of the day today. What are the implications with Imagine Learning if you purchase? I probably would have to look at the contract that you want to sign, or have your legal department look at it to see what the implications are. I know that Imagine Learning did send out some partnership agreements for schools to sign. That was not instigated by USBE. We didn't know anything about that. So that's something that Imagine Learning is doing irrespective of any state contracts. Does that answer the Imagine Learning question? It was a pretty vague answer. I think the answer is reach out to me personally, and I'll look at your situation, because I don't think I can give a blanket answer without knowing more details.
Yeah, there's another question. The other question is, so is the funding that Imagine Learning referring to EL software? Yes. I would not think it would be the money, since there was an RFP for Elevation. So it seems like there, and then have other districts agreed to Imagine Learning? What kind of professional development would be for Elevation? Can you tell us about Elevation? So let me just preface this with a caveat. So Jennifer Thronson's been texting me based on, and we need people to mute themselves because there's feedback. So Rhonda from Ogden, could you mute yourself? Thanks. So one of the big issues is we're actually in the middle of a legislative session, a special session today, right, Melanie, where there are ongoing conversations. So I promise, right, at the end of the day, once we actually find out what's happening, because we don't really know, we can really respond. Melanie can send, Jennifer's going to update me as soon as the decisions are made by the state legislature. Melanie will construct an email that will help better understand the implications for EL software, because we really don't know, based on the way in which the legislature and the data are going to be used today in the session to determine what's going to happen with the EL software. But we just wanted you to know because there were so many questions, and we don't want you to be overly anxious, but at the same time, we want you to really look at the data in relationship to how software actually does support students learning English. I think there's actually a study that's being done that I can send out to you so you can actually see the implications of the difference between software and face-to-face interventions that are well structured, and then regular well scaffolded grade level content instruction, right? So the biggest question is we're not really sure about how the legislature is going to go. So I just want you to not be so anxious about it, because as soon as the session is over, Melanie will contact you. So Melanie, how does that sound?
That sounds great. I can give a quick overview of elevation, and then I can also tell you about the research that some of the statistics that we have pulled in the last 24 hours about Imagine Learning. I can put that in the email as well, or I can tell them right now, or I can do both, whatever your timing is.
Okay, why don't you actually do both? Because I think people are really interested. The other thing that's important is later on in the meeting, we're going to review the application for funding, which is supplemental, and it's a specific redesign of the application based on kind of the COVID situation that we're in. And once we get to that point, then I'll talk about that. But I think the biggest issue is that you can do the elevation, and then you can actually let them know the actual research, the evaluation that was done. And then we'll put it all together and send it out in an email to everybody. So Melanie, why don't you do that, sweetheart? Thank you.
Okay, sounds great. First, I'll go over the research that we have done in the past 24 hours. We had an education appropriation meeting this week, and a lot of the politicians said, our constituents are telling us that Imagine Learning really works well. How come you're taking this away from us? And so we wanted to look at the numbers to see that. So we compared students who were using Imagine Learning, EL students who were using Imagine Learning, with students who were not using Imagine Learning, and we compared their achievement scores, and they were about the same. So Imagine Learning may be good for a lot of things, but it's not necessarily in correlation with higher achievement. So like the constituents say, teachers have come to love it, to depend on it. But we, according to the numbers that we ran, there was not a lot of difference between students who used Imagine Learning and students who did not. So, and we'll be sharing that research with you in the email that we send out tomorrow. Any questions about that Imagine Learning piece before I go on to elevation?
Yeah, I had a question. I wondered if that was just ELL students in that study.
What we did is we did ELL students in 4th, 5th, and 6th grades. And the reason we chose those grades is we did not want to use any of the K-3 software initiative students. So we wanted it to be specifically EL students, because students in grades 4, 5, and 6 do not participate in the early literacy software program. So that's why we chose the older students. So it was grades 4th, 5th, and 6th.
Follow up, what grade is Imagine Learning intended for?
For EL software, it's intended for, the contract that they had previously was for K-12 for EL software. For early interactive software, EISP, the K-3 program, it's K-3. So EL is K-12 and early literacy is K-3.
Okay, so could I just clarify something? When you ask a question, could you actually say your name and what district you're from or what school? So that would be the first thing. The second thing is one of the reasons most of the Imagine Learning was focused on elementary, even though it was a K-12 contract, because the secondary was outsourced, and there were some people who were using also the secondary Imagine Learning. The other thing is the data actually show that if students have access to higher level courses and college ready courses, and we've done studies, and if you're interested, I can send that to you, that students who are English learners, if they're reclassified as proficient in English and have quality, regular, grade level content instruction in the elementary school, then they have access to honors classes, AP classes. High school kids actually take multiple language. They take another language, even though they have 2 languages already. So the goal of focusing on elementary education for English learners helps us better understand the implications for access to higher level courses. This study was actually done with 5 cohorts of students who had 4-year scholarships to the Business Echo School. And actually 99% graduation rate from a 4-year university, which is the University of Utah in the business school. And if you're interested in that, I can send you that. Okay, so Melanie, do you want to say anything about, you want to talk a bit about elevation?
Yes, and what you said is a perfect segue into elevation. Elevation has 3 different aspects. The first is the math aspect. We all know that mathematics is a gatekeeper for a lot of students, and the academic vocabulary is pretty rigorous. So elevation has a math elevation is what they call it. And that's where students will watch math lessons that will pre-teach them with concepts as well as academic vocabulary, so that when they attend their math classes with their peers, they can be learning along with their peers and stay with them. Before I go on to the other 2 aspects, are there any questions about the math aspect?
Melanie?
Yes.
This is Christy from Weber District. When I had looked into elevation, I loved the math. It was really made me happy and excited. But what I saw that they offered, it was just for a couple of grade levels. Is that true?
Yes, 6 through 9.
Okay.
Yes, that is true.
Thanks.
Okay, the second thing that Elevation does is it has a data portal. It takes Utrecht's information from USBE and SIS information from the LEA and what other fields that you all want to put in. And it puts all of the data in one place so that all the stakeholders have a chance to look through all of the data and can quickly see, oh, this student is doing well in this area. In this standard, they're not. So we need to work on this intervention here. So it gives something for teachers, administrators, and LEA level people to see quickly where every student is. So that's the second component. Any questions on that one?
Sorry, Melanie, it's Christy again.
Great.
So what data is uploaded to this data dashboard? We as a district just are buying Panorama, which does the same sort of thing. And I'm wondering if this adds any data components to what we're already getting with Panorama or not.
I don't know Panorama. I do know that without Elevation right now, we're working on a state customization so that all of the Utah LEAs will have access to all of this Utrecht's information. So that's something that can be changed if we want to add more, or we have too much information and we want to take away some noise. So I can't answer that question because I don't think I know enough about what Elevation is going to do with Utah, what is decided, or what Panorama does. Good question, though.
Can I make a comment? This is Jenny Cross from Box Elder.
Hi.
Hi. So we actually contracted Elevation this year. And so we have Panorama and we have Elevation. And so I kind of have some experience with both of those. Panorama is really good for your early warning system, but you can't get the breakdown of all of the EL data in one place. And if your district was like mine, we had like 3 different places that we were trying to pull our information about our English learner students from. And so Elevation, it will bring it all into one place. And I don't know, Christelle or Melanie, I can share my screen and I can show everyone what Elevation, the data looks like, because I think that that's powerful. Would you be okay with that?
I think it sounds great.
Okay, so let me share this screen.
Okay, Jenny.
Yes.
Okay, so this is like a whole nother meeting.
Okay.
So if you just give an overview would be great. And then we'll set up another meeting after we end up getting the information from the state legislators.
Okay.
Because that's the other issue. But if you just walk us through what you're saying, and then we'll have just a special meeting with Melanie and the team after the state legislature has made some decisions. And then we'll include you as the presenter. So just give us an overview. Thanks.
Okay, it will be less than 1 minute. So these are training students. They're not our students, so I'm not giving any data, but it gives you all of your student information in one place. If you looked at a student, you'd be able to see their entire EL profile in one place, and it breaks down their WIDA scores. You have test results for multiple years, and you can see their progress, you can see their growth. Teachers can do their goals. Right here, they automatically come up with can-dos for the students, and you can also create dashboards for your schools. Here's one that I created for our principals, where they can click on it and they can see all of their students in their schools. You can organize it by who's monitored, home language. We pull our students not based on whether they're ELs, but based on their home language survey. And that allows us to know who our new students are in the district, who need to be screened. And so it's just really helpful to get all that data in one place. So I'm done.
Thank you so much, Jenny. I'm going to be contacting you because I have a whole bunch of other questions for you as well, but we probably don't want to take time up in this meeting with everyone for those questions. So I really appreciate your sharing out with that, Jenny. Thank you. Any more comments before I go to the third aspect of elevation?
I think there was another question. Katina wanted to know if it was all English learner students. It was all, so kindergarten as well. Is the data for like all the students, all the English learners?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. So why don't you go to the next part, Melanie? Thank you.
The next part is a bank of activities and strategies that teachers can use that are specifically targeted to their students' needs. For example, if a student is struggling with a certain concept, the teacher can go see where those students' skills are aligned using the first part of using the previous component of elevation, and then they have access to a bank of activities and a bank of strategies that are embedded within that specific content. So content, strategies, and activities can all be interfaced with each other and give pathways that the teachers can use to provide targeted interventions for students. I just saw Christy say Acadians or Dibbles. I'm writing that down. That's really good information. I'm going to see when I meet next with elevation, I'm going to put that on my list of things that we need to consider.
As soon as we send out the email about the decisions for legislation, or what's happening with legislation, then what we'll do is Melanie and I'll get together and we'll send out something so that you can actually have all your questions. So Melanie can have all the questions ahead of time. She can meet with elevation and then address them. But I think the biggest issue is that we have to really focus on what's happening at the legislative session today. As soon as we find out that, then we can give you more information related to specific questions, and then have a session together. Okay, so how does that sound? Robin says, we met with an elevation rep and were told they would be able to pull Acadian's data. Thanks, Robin. So Robin is from Murray, so she's already done that, and she's actually going to speak with Charlene Louie as well. Wrong, Murray. Okay. Are there any other questions for Melanie before she departs? This is Robin. It was Robin from Cash.
I thank you for letting me come to your meeting and ask you to please reach out with any questions, concerns, complaints, anything we can do to make this program work really, really well. I'm excited about it. I'm hopeful that we're going to get some money for this program, and I want to make sure that we use the money in the very best way possible. Thanks,
Melanie. You're wonderful. We really appreciate the work that you've done and your whole team, as well as the evaluation of the software program. So thank you. We all love you. We appreciate you. Thanks. Okay, so we're actually going to, I'm just going to do a couple of brief things, and then we're going to ask Robin Williams from Murray and Charlene Louie to talk about the actual initiatives that they're using and resources to help kind of address some of the issues that our student poets brought up. So the first update is I would really encourage you to go to the Title III updated website. I've been updating that. And all the meetings are there for the next 2 years. And then monitoring visits will be redesigned and determined based on what LEAs need. But the focus, as last year, will be on TSI-EL schools, which obviously is a challenge because we're not doing RISE testing. On the Title III website, there's also a Communities of Practice course catalog for online professional learning that is free of cost, and it's during this COVID period. So it's open enrollment, it's self-paced, it's for 3 credits for the ESL endorsement, which later on, with another group of people, we'll be talking about what we've been piloting for Title III, which is a competency-based approach to provide opportunities for teachers and educators for a more open experience. And some districts have already done that very effectively, like Davis School District has their own program. So if there are a lot of COVID resources on the Title III website, there are additional remote learning. We just uploaded something about masks in multiple languages with visuals, so it's all oral language. And we'll focus on the other things. We did the remote screener. So Robin Williams from Murray, are you ready to talk about what you designed, what Murray designed in relationship to addressing issues related to race?
Sure, and I put a link in there. I don't know, Christelle, if you're able to pull that up for me or not. And I can send it again if we need to. Let me put it in for everybody. I don't know how many of you had the opportunity to see Procter & Gamble, Jess Williams. They contracted and did a series on Let's Talk, or I think it was hashtag Talk About Bias.
Okay, wonderful. And then let's have Haley, Miss Haley.
Oops, I'll wait for just a minute. So I had opportunity to watch the Procter & Gamble Let's Talk About Bias, and it's a series of videos where they pair unlikely people together and they have them watch a video, and then they just free chat. It was unscripted, but they had some that were pretty natural, pretty friendly conversations, and then they had others that were a little more tense between the people. But I think it was a really positive opportunity to watch that. And I don't know if you've seen the other Procter & Gamble video. That was happening in Salt Lake City and across the nation that had to do with protests. And we had teachers and board members and people who were weighing in on social media with their thoughts and opinions. And it was concerning to some people that it created conflict. So with that being said, one of the things, as I was asked in a board meeting by board members, that I said to them is I felt like we were at a juncture where as educators, we needed to do a better job of listening to build understanding about why people were at the place that they were at. So I took the ideas from the Procter & Gamble videos and then the discussion that I had with my school board and cast a pretty wide net. Really appreciative of Michelle Loveday and Charlene Louie, who gave me names of people that they thought would be good panelists, and reached out to a lot of different people and asked if they would be willing to share their stories with Murray educators. And the format that I chose to do this in was to put the 12 panelists together on Zoom and then broadcast live using YouTube, and did that so that they could talk with one another and also not have the distraction of having almost 200 participants who I wanted to have them listen more than I wanted to have them talk, if that makes any sense. Along the way, I had also contracted with Klastina Mahan Reynolds and Megan Zarnetsky, who are both out of Park City, to work with my administrators and school board on implicit bias training. And so subsequently asked them if they would become our moderators, and ended up scheduling the administrators and school board in the morning with Klastina and Megan, and then did the listening with care panelist discussion in the afternoon. And then subsequently gave teachers a writing assignment where they could reflect, they could choose the questions they wanted to reflect on, and they could choose a stipend or they could choose professional development credit from that piece of things. We've also this week continued those conversations with 3 of our panelists. Dr. David Dominguez, who is from BYU, he was a BYU law professor and now has just become very passionate about sharing the idea of implicit bias and the impact that teachers can have on students. Additionally, have contracted with Michelle Loveday and Dr. Jackie Thompson to work with our elementary educators on having conversations that not only address implicit bias, but also creating space for all of our students. And as I think about that, other huge things that we talked about with all of this series of training that we've been doing is the idea that we know that our students are in a precarious situation in that they haven't been in our schools for 5 months, and there's been all kinds of social, emotional, and health upheaval. And we really wanted to get back to that idea of creating community and knowing that not only do you have all the functions of a school and the rules and those kinds of things, but operating as a community and that we care about one another, even if there is all this social upheaval. And that also brought forward a real heavy layer, if you will, for teachers who were just worried about, are kids going to fight with each other over race? If they have different political ideologies in their home, what is that going to look like from a 5-year-old all the way up through our 12th graders? And teachers often want to tamp that conversation down because it feels unsafe. And sometimes you would argue too that it's not related to curriculum or reading or learning or those kinds of things. And yet we know that that's part of that whole experience that a student is bringing in, and that we really can't have community and we can't have that support for each other if we have conflict that's been silenced. And so I think that as we've moved forward with the trainings that we're doing this week and that we'll continue doing, it really is not only about understanding our own implicit bias that we might project as a teacher, but then the second goal really has been centered on the idea of, as teachers, how do we build a community and a culture that gives space to all of our students and provides value to all of our students, so that they are feeling like they are heard and they are valued in the classroom. And I have had several teachers from these experiences who have asked about book studies. And it's been really interesting as they've put forward not only the conversations on implicit bias and racism, but then I've had one teacher who reached out to talk about how do we have civil discourse? How do we teach our secondary students how to disagree with each other in a way that doesn't result in a really divided, violent place, but is saying, I hear you and I understand you. So that's really me talking very rapidly about where we've kind of gone with things. But I do think from your vantage point, it's worth looking at the Procter & Gamble materials. It's worth looking at Jess Williams, who is part of that Procter & Gamble, with the talk about bias. And then you are more than welcome to view our YouTube panelist discussion. And Christelle's provided, it's in that link as well. But I will tell you that not all of this has been glossy or necessarily comfortable. I have a handful of teachers who were pretty angry about this whole thing and felt like our messaging was that they should be ashamed to be white teachers. And it's surprising to me. And as I picked at this with a couple of teachers who were pretty stuck in their feelings, I have identified that because we had the chat room on the YouTube channel, that we had a lot of teachers who were fighting with each other. And so it wasn't so much the panelists, it was more about what teachers were saying to each other. But I think the hardship of that is that I do have a few teachers who absolutely could not open their hearts enough or get beyond a fixed mindset to hear what the panelists were saying. And that's been a hard conversation too. And, I know that with what we do in training and working with educators, because I'm tasked with not only secondary schools, but then also our ESL population for all of our schools, is we shoot for that middle ground, which we know we have hearts and souls of teachers that get into this for a reason and can usually pull on those heartstrings. And I've had to kind of disengage from the handful of people who I feel like have absolutely the wrong mindset for our students. And I guess I figured that maybe I'll have to circle back around in thinking through, here's the standard we put forward in Murray District, here's what we're asking our teachers to do. And if teachers are not abiding by that, if they are overtly being racist to our students, then it becomes a conversation of discipline, if you will, with working with the principals and working with our HR department to just say, this can't be the way things happen. So what questions do all of you have for me?
This is Betty from Salt Lake. Robin, thank you for allowing me to watch that. I thought it was great watching all the panelists. I like the way it played out. So kudos to you. I think that was awesome.
Thank you. I just, if you guys don't mind and feel indulge me for another couple minutes, if that's okay, Christelle. I really, I've watched it several times now, and I really love the conversation that happened. And I think if you have opportunity to watch it, I very purposely chose some people who are in my life who have been harmed. And I have a very sweet friend who runs with my group, who is from Vietnam, and she is an engineering student here. And she has loved every minute of her 3 years in Utah and every minute of her 3 years in the United States. And just a few months ago, she has since experienced being assaulted. She's been shoved, she's been spit on, she's been sprayed with Lysol, and she's been asked to leave the store at a Walmart in Salt Lake City. And it's baffling to me that these grown-ups who live as our neighbors in our communities can treat somebody so horribly. And it's all related to the fact that she is Asian. And I purposely chose her because I wanted people to not only hear and be outraged like I was, but also to hear kind of her journey in understanding racism. She also grew up in a very impoverished family in Vietnam. And so she can talk about how she was treated in her own country and then coming here and then kind of reconciling how she at first wanted to make excuses for people being, upset by COVID, to now where she's saying this behavior is not acceptable. There's a former student that we used as a panelist, and he is very personable. He's one of those people that you meet and you love him. He is a DACA recipient, and he works for Park City Police Department as their PIO. And growing up when he was young, all the way till now, his biggest dream has been to be a police officer, and that has been devastated because he cannot be a police officer, nor can he work for the FBI like he wanted to. So he's settling for law school, which I think is funny that he's settled, if you will, but he is in a precarious position in that he kind of thought he was solidified being here and has once again been notified that his DACA status is tenuous. I chose another young man who was adopted into one of the more affluent or most affluent families in Salt Lake City. And he and his brother are Black, and he went to Olympus High School, and he very much shared the differences in stories about when people would discover who his mom was versus the way he was being treated at times. And he actually provided a lot of insight about things that teachers said or did in their classrooms, probably unknowingly, although in one circumstance he felt like it was very overt racism. Some of those stories that are hard to hear, but they're the true stories that exist. And Luna Banuri had her children go through the Salt Lake City School District, and she talks about her boys being very much loved by the school system until they became young Muslim adolescents, and the change and reaction to her boys as they went through the system and the reactions that people had. And then we had extraordinary educators that also joined us that were able to bridge both the world of being parents in our community as well as being teachers in our community, and had some really fabulous ideas about implicit bias and teaching children and everything that's in between. So thank you for letting me share that, Crystal, my video trailer, if you will.
Thanks, Robin. I think the other thing that's really interesting, and if people are interested, you can let me know. The things that you're saying actually came up when I did focus groups with high school students, and I have those transcripts because I recorded the students and then transcribed all of their comments based on their experiences. And in that process, I met this amazing young man, Abelardo, from Park City. And Momitu and I took him out for lunch with another amazing student from Salt Lake, Joel. And Abelardo is just amazing. He's actually finished his student teaching, and on our playlist, there's this really amazing presentation done by Melanie Moffat in summer school. And it goes back to this idea of preparing English learners to actually go to higher level classes and be better prepared to engage with other students so that those kinds of negative experiences are mitigated. So I would really recommend, and I'll send this out, to go to our playlist and listen to what Park City has done. Abelardo is starting his student teaching, hopefully in the spring. And one of the things that he's actually committed to is policy work in relationship to creating open and inclusive classroom environments for high school kids. And this is an amazing young man that maybe the next time we have a meeting, we'll have him actually come and talk about the way in which the programs in Park City, the content link courses, and the way in which his high school instruction supported him in being committed to education and becoming a teacher, and also being committed to issues related to policy. So I just want to thank you so much, Robin, for your commitment. And conversations like this are really challenging, but they're also an opportunity, right? So crisis is both a challenge and an opportunity for our hearts to be opened so that we can be more loving and learn with and from each other, no matter what our current viewpoints are. So I just want to thank you for that, Robin, and your courage and the example that Murray is setting for all of us. So Charlene, do you want to talk to us a little bit, Charlene, about the resources that you've provided and any other commentary that you want in relationship to the work that you helped Murray with? You have to oh, there you go.
Okay. Well, thanks, Robin. I too, as Betty stated, are excited to see the results of the conversation that we had. There's a few of us that meet regularly as ALS language service directors, kind of like a PLC setting, and that was a discussion that came up, and Robin had asked our thoughts, and we each gave our input and everything, and so it's great to see the results of that. By the way, if anybody is interested, we would love to meet with Christelle more often, but we know that our meetings are, quarterly. And so in the meantime, we have these other meetings. If you're interested in joining us, please let us know. It's open to anybody. But anyway, I just wanted to share what Granite School District is doing this year. As a result of COVID-19, the earthquakes. By the way, I don't know if you knew there were 2,305 of the earthquakes since that March, 16th or 18th, whenever we had the first one. And then also Black Lives Matter. So when you think about three stressors that have affected each of us individually, and then we think about how have they affected our students and the families and our communities. One of the things then that is we know we're going to need to address the feelings and the emotions that our students and our teachers are going to be having. And so as part of our MTSS initiative in Granite School District, we did our MTSS kickoff this year, looking at and using a lot of resources from CASEL, KACASEL.org, and looking at social emotional learning and the impact of trauma, not only in multiple areas, including racial equity. And so we took that presentation that they had, and there were like 4 areas that we talked about, and one of them dealt with trauma and racial equity. And so what we're trying to do is integrate the message between social emotional learning, our racial equity, our discussions on inclusion, diversity, equity, etc. And so we started that kickoff. All the administrators, we did a virtual conference where administrators in 4 different sessions could attend one of the 4 or more if they wanted to come back and listen to all the other workshops. And so that was our first introduction, and then on top of that, we also created scripts for them and recordings so that the principals, administrators could then go back to their schools and share that message. Now, it's not a have to do it, because there's so many other things that our teachers and administrators need to share or to do professional development with their teachers. But yeah, there were several schools feeling the need that they need to address these conversations. So in addition to those modules that we prepared, we also put together, and this is where Christelle had asked me to share this, a list, or a racial equity educational resources toolkit. And so if I could just read, I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs that start off our list that's available, and we're welcome to share it with others if you're interested. So to preface this, it says, Granite School District believes that schools should be places for the practice of equity, for the building of understanding, and for the active engagement of all in creating racial equity for all students. It is our hope that teachers, students, and schools will create opportunities to explore and grapple with the past, present, and future status of Black lives in our society, and to affirm that status as equal to and not secondary to the lives of others. As educators, we need to have courageous, honest dialogues about race and about what is happening in our society and in our students' lives. Building strong relationships with students and colleagues is a critical component of our work. This document is intended to provide you with resources to use in preparing to address and respond to our students, staff, and community members. And then in this document, there are 4 different sections. The first section, it says, is educating yourself. So we've listed some resources for preparing a positive classroom environment, and then resources for learning about Black Lives Matter. And so there's some resources and links there. The second is classroom activities, where teachers may design lessons, facilitate conversations, invite local experts or guest speakers, or work in other ways. And so we've got lesson plans and activities for elementary level, and then as well as secondary level. Is this an exhaustive list? No, but we've got several ideas that would then prompt them to, to do their own research and find some others as well. The third section is continuing the conversation. So talking about race and equity to promote social justice is something that can happen throughout the school year and be weaved into regular classroom activities. So along that line, as district folks too, we're creating book study groups. We've had interest from several administrators in different networks to start doing a book study and doing a deeper dive, look into some of the issues that are amongst us right now. And then we've got in that continuing the conversation, we have a list of books as well as video and film. I just want to shout out to a couple of teaching tolerance resources. One of them is Let's Talk, which is a guide to discussing race. And so you might want to look, I encourage you to look at that. The other one is a Speak Up at School guide, where, when we're talking about strategies with teachers, then how do we interrupt the bias, or how do we, is there something that I could use? Teachers will always want some kind of a strategy or whatever. And I love what Michelle Loveday and I, a few years ago, did this presentation with Speak Up at the School guide, and kind of came up with this little catchy phrase, IQE squared: interrupt, question, educate, and echo. And if you go through that, it gives teachers, when you hear this comment, then we need to interrupt it. And the thing is, we don't interrupt it whenever we feel like it. We need to be able to feel comfortable in interrupting it every time. And there's ways that we can say it, just as someone was saying earlier, that we say it in a nice way, that it's not derogatory or not a put down, or it's not to shame anyone. But these are some of the things that we can work on to create that environment that would be safe, supportive, and equitable as we look at the impact of racial inequality that we know is existing in our society. One of the 2 main things that we're finding from students, I actually had the opportunity to listen to a group of students from a high school in our district, and their two main issues that they talked about was teachers and their biases, their unconscious bias or implicit bias, that they have no idea what they're saying or what they're doing, and it's manifested through microaggressions, some of their statements. And so those are based on what we're listening, what we're gathering from students. We're also then turning around and saying, okay, from our students, this is what we've learned. And these are some things they're saying, please know what you're doing and know how it affects us. And just think about, by the time I go home at the end of it, one of the students said, when I go home at the end of the day and I think back to the multiple microaggressions, it's like, all I can do is to unload, refresh, rebuild, and then come back just to have that pushed on me again the next day. And so, just as Christelle said, we need to listen to the voices of our students and our community and be able to proactively address the concerns that are out there. So we're hoping to make, we know that a one-stop shop, or a flyby or a tourist approach is not, when I say a tourist approach, it's at food, fun, and festivals. That's just a small introductory into the world of diversity and inclusion, et cetera. But we really need to make it systemic, and we need to have it occur multiple times during the year so that we're saying this message, and we're all being exposed to that and understanding the importance of it. I want to echo some of the things that Robin said. Some of us have been doing this for many years, and it just seems like, sometimes it seems like you're the only voice, or they don't want to listen to you, or here she comes, the equity police or something like that. But I have to say, just like in the words of looking back at John Lewis's life, think about what he did years ago, and he continued to do it in spite of the adversity and in spite of what he said, getting into that necessary trouble or that good trouble. And the words that we heard last night too, if any of you were listening to President Barack Obama's, where he talked about the words of the past. I can't remember the exact quote, but it echoes the generations. So we think about, even though it might be hard today, I can testify to you, because I've been doing this now for 25 years, that I see a lot of changes have taken place, but we need to continue to do the good work. So kudos to all of you that are out there doing it, and it's hard, but that's why we're all together and we can support one another in this effort. So thank you, Christelle, for letting me share this.
Thanks, Charlene. I think there's something in the chat that is, so we started coaching kids that they can report on Safe UT app if they feel like teachers are saying racist or bullying things. We've had reports made. So that's another great example of creating conditions to honor student voice, because that's who we're here for. I mean, we're actually here for the students so that we can create together a future that they will love. I mean, that's really the point. So I'm just going to say one of the things that's, and also there are people, I would suggest that you would email, once I send out everything and the legislative session, we'll find out what's going on. We'll actually schedule some times so that you can have access to the work that Granite's doing, access to the work that Robin and Murray's doing, and other resources. And the other resources that I mentioned are on the USBE Title III website. And if you go to the homepage, you'll see the COVID resources, and at the bottom it'll say special students or special needs or whatever. And you click on that, it'll go right to USBE Title III, where all the remote learning resources are, and the communities of practice open enrollment courses that focus on bullying as an actual epidemic, and who the long-term health issues of not just being bullied, but being the bully, being bullied, and those who are bystanders and don't do anything. That's kind of Charlene's whole point about how you interrupt, the barrage of microaggressions that end up sometimes unconsciously being used to normalize what happens in classrooms. Park City, the kids that I met with at Park City actually brought up the issue of being trained in how to deal with microaggressions. So if you're interested in helping students actually respond in a way very similar to what Charlene is talking about. Okay, so I'm going to actually go to the revised application. So whenever you qualify for Title III funding, which is actually based on the number of English learners, it's a formula. So Title III funding really focuses on federal funds that are supplemental in relationship to how you use state funds to ensure the civil rights of English learners. One of the first documents that I sent out that came from the Department of Education during COVID is a fact sheet addressing the risk of COVID-19 in schools while protecting the civil rights of students. So just because we're in a pandemic, civil rights doesn't go out the door. So all the issues related to civil rights, again, the documents are on the Title III website, as well as the self-assessment tool. The self-assessment tool for funding is an annual self-assessment to ensure that the way in which civil rights legislation is impacting your actual practices. So the self-assessment tool hasn't changed, but the actual application has. So I'll just tell you how it's changed. And even though we ended up getting the preliminary allocations for Title III funding early, we still had to wait for consortiums to either waive their funds or accept their funds based mostly on charter schools and other smaller districts who organize in a consortium with a fiscal agent so that they can get funding. The biggest issue is that the board rule says that November 1 is the date for the application with the final self-assessment tool and your application in the Utah grants system. However, because we ended up getting the preliminary allocations early, our hope is by September 1, we'll actually have the final allocations, which we think will end up contributing more to the way funds are allocated, because usually many charters waive their funding because they haven't met the $10,000 mark. The other thing is the immigrant funding hasn't been distributed only because the federal definition is connected to the way in which data are gathered. And so I'm waiting for the data and the actual formula that we got approved, identify the 3 districts that are above the 10,000 minimum, and that funding will go out. So I'm saying this because people who do apply and are eligible for Title III funding, and if you want to email me personally, that's fine. The preliminary allocations went out in like at the end of June. You don't have to submit your self-assessment and your application until the official deadline, November 1st. And I've also included enrollment for parent questions. There have been some issues related to refugee case managers, as well as the way in which districts register and enroll students. This is a serious civil rights issue, and creating barriers, whether it's digital or in face-to-face, ends up being really problematic, especially when students who are students learning English, they're immigrants, they're refugees, and they're being charged fees. Okay, so we've gone through this whole thing about online registration and fees, and then invoices being sent to families who don't speak English. Okay, so this is a serious civil rights violation. So all those documents are on the Title III website, and it's really important to become familiar with that. And it's an opportunity to be an advocate with your business administrator, with your curriculum people, with your colleagues, to really help them think about what an inclusive environment actually looks like. The application for funding has changed, and the only way it's changed is that the ESSA law requires decisions for allocation of funding, which is supplemental funding, because other funds are intended to ensure the civil rights of English learners. So it doesn't matter if you get Title III funds or you don't, or you only have one student who's an English learner. You still have the obligation to ensure that they have language support instructional programs that really support their access to grade level content as well as becoming English proficient. So the only change is, since we don't have RISE data, the explanation is really simple. It says, explain how you are using students' WIDA data to evaluate the effectiveness of your language instruction program. Be specific for schools in TSI for EL. Now, we're pretty excited with Megan saying that the individualized student reports from WIDA are now uploaded into the data gateway. So you have to make sure that all the teachers who are working and teaching students learning English, that they actually know how to access those individualized reports and support the kind of instruction that helps them have access to grade level content. So it's a wide range. The whole idea of pulling out students and from a grade level instruction so that teachers at the grade level in regular education aren't as skillful as we can help them be in meeting the needs of English learners. So the second part of that is describe the evidence-based strategies to ensure equitable access to grade level content. This goes back to the idea of, and we had a wonderful session with John Zerbakken, who talked about the reorganization and the redesigning of the way in which they use policies, practices, and support to ensure that students learning English graduate from high school, and worked with teams in the high school to ensure, along with the counselors, that quarterly meetings would really support students in having access, equitable access to not just grade level content, but to other academic courses that help them have access to higher opportunities for college as well as career. So I sent you the application. You can look at the revision. Those aren't due again until November. The biggest issue is the way in which you allocate Title III funds to schools. Now, we've brought this up many, many times. Equity is not equal, which means if you have a school that's a Title I school and has 200 English learners and has 100% poverty and 80% students learning English, and they get the same amount of Title III funds that a school with 7 English learners, that is not equity, right? So equity does not mean equal. It means that the needs of the child in relationship to the school and the support that's provided should be weighted in a way that when those schools receive the funds, the work that they do with English learners can actually have a significant difference. And we have many examples of elementary schools that do that. Provo is an example of a weighted per pupil allocation based on the language proficiency level of the student. So if you have a newcomer, obviously the resources and the work that you do with a newcomer is different than and just as challenging as a student who is stuck at level 4, which often happens. So for me, and you can email me, there's a link that says we can have really well scaffolded technical assistance where we can have a private conversation on a WebEx room to really support you in thinking about how you can look at the way in which you're evaluating the effectiveness of your language program and your language services. Okay. Evaluating effectiveness is the way in which you do things differently. It's like a teacher who learns who the learner is, and based on their understanding of the learner and their family and their community, they actually adjust their instruction to better support the student's success. So we're trying to embed this in the application for funding, especially when so many of our schools are in targeted school improvement for English learners, actually more schools than those with students with disabilities. So the question is, we have to wonder why it is. This goes back to what Robin and Charlene are saying, as well as the students who read their poems. Why is it that students, our diverse students, and students who are learning English, and they have more than one language, right? Why is it that they're scoring in the lowest 5% continually? And we have more and more schools in TSI specifically for English learners. So if you have any questions, I'm just going to go over the issue of masks. And also the 180/990 requirement that's being waived. I'll do masks first because at 11 we're going to have Evie Farguson, who's the assistant principal at Utah International School. They've done some really amazing work through remote learning. And this relates to how you determine student engagement for funding because of the 990 requirement. So would anyone like to ask a question before I go to the whole issue of masks? Okay, so I sent you two documents. The first document is the mask FAQ, and it was sent out on August 10th. And then there was also another document which was sent out with the state public health order. And the reason I sent that to you is that it's very specific about exemptions. Families asking for exemptions to the mask requirement. Okay, so those two documents are really important for you to read really thoroughly. One of the reasons is that in the August 10th document, it's very clearly stated that a student not wearing a mask will be charged with a misdemeanor, which is left to the district and the school. Now, being charged with a misdemeanor, and I just read this morning in the paper that those requirements aren't being lifted. Now, the question of people objecting to wearing masks ends up being a really serious issue related to our past conversations with Robin and Charlene. In the mask FAQ, it's really important that you read very carefully the underlined section that says schools must be careful to equitably implement the order. For example, and I'm just going to read this. If all students seeking a medical exemption are required to provide a medical provider's note, then all students should be held to the same standard. Exceptions should not be made based on subjective factors such as trustworthiness of the student, a history of difficulty communicating with a parent, a familial relationships with the student. Another example might be if the school provides a disposable mask for a student the first time and the student to bring a mask. The school must treat all students the same. It cannot provide disposable masks to a student who is labeled a good student with no history of behavior problems, but simply send the problem student home for the day. Okay, so I'm reading that specifically because when you receive all these documents, sometimes not identifying this issue about equity in relationship to our underlying assumptions about, maybe specific students. So does anybody have any questions about the documents that I sent out related to masks and also the state public health order around exemptions? Because you should actually, the FAQ doesn't really explain all the exemptions, but the other one does. Or comments. Do you have any questions or comments? So one comment is, which is really excellent. Thanks, Rachel. Not everyone has equitable access to healthcare provider. So the reason this is really critical is something that I actually witnessed and saw, and Christy Wagner can attest to this. I might ask her to join in. They actually have a process of a student study team that is actually the best student study team I've ever seen, organized in a way where you have the previous year's teacher and the current teacher and all the team spending a very focused, well scaffolded protocol led by the principal on the needs of each individual student that they've identified. They don't bring in the data in the very beginning. They actually describe the interactions with the student from multiple perspectives, students, other adults, and then they talk about their home visits and their understanding of the family. So this issue about healthcare is really a critical issue because even though last year we had Medicaid expansion, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of children in Utah who have not in any way registered for access to health care, even though they're eligible, because they're worried about what Robin brought up previously about being undocumented, right? So any kind of response, whether it's the census or whether it's equitable access to health care, ends up being a crisis for them and fear. It's embedded in this fear. So the question is the way in which you work with a child and their family to better understand their situation, especially when it comes to the orders related to a mask. Because when I was working with the Refugee Collaborative, one of the biggest issues is if this rule about misdemeanor is not carried out, and it is carried out, then how does that impact, just like, when someone gets an invoice for fees that they should be waived from, and then it gets sent to a debt collection agency, how do all those things impact their actual status of being in the country? And that came up from refugee resettlement agencies who are really concerned about the implementation of masks. So any questions? Or Christy, do you want to talk about your student study team process? Because it's probably the most brilliant group of educators working in a very systematic way. And I know someone has actually designed the process, and we're trying to get all of them together to do, a recorded webinar so we can have it in our playlist. So Christy, do you want to say anything?
Sure, Christelle. We have these teams that we have in each of our elementary schools, and we're working on them in secondary, but it is a child study focus team. And I like that some of our schools have renamed them to child success team. So what they're doing is meeting and trying to understand the whole child and what their needs are and what might be hindering them from being successful. So this team usually includes the reading specialist, like you said, teachers from previous years and that teacher, this year's teacher, the school counselor, just, anybody who could help identify and help support the child in their needs. So it's been a really great program. I've been able to work with a lot of teams in the schools I've been in, and it just gives us an opportunity just to focus on that child and see what we can do to help them be successful. Some of our junior highs and high schools are, and I'm sure this is happening in other districts as well, but they're coming up with student advocates that advocate and work personally with our EL population. So they develop relationships with the child and their family, and just are a great asset for that community as well.
Thanks, Christy. I actually texted Evie to see if she can come on early, because we won't take the whole time. But I just want to go back to this idea of learner validated enrollment measures, the 180 to the 990. So, Christy, some people are saying that they'd love to see the protocol and the questions you use. So we need to get offline and then talk. I've already connected with the elementary school that I actually saw it being implemented, as well as kind of the person who was designing it as well. So that would be really great if we could get together and get all that information and actually have a WebEx to support the way in which your protocol is done. It's really, really quite amazing. I was so impressed that people didn't instantly go to the data. You know how oftentimes, that happens. But the kinds of questions they asked related to describing the child's interactions was just probably the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, done with such loving kindness, without judgments of the family at all. I mean, really understanding the actual conditions and situation for the family was really impressive. So, on August 7th, and also this afternoon at 3:00, there's another board meeting. And I know we're all incredibly busy, but I think it's really important for us to understand some of the decisions and the attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors of board members who are making policies related to what happens in our schools. So I think it's really important to get on once in a while, especially when they're talking about really important issues. This is one that's the 180-90 hour requirement. The reason we all know that this is really important because of the minimum school day and instructional hour requirements. So it's only specific for 2020 and 2021 because of the issue that we have related to remote learning and what happened in March when there was a soft closure. And so the question ends up being, funding for schools. I mean, how do you actually determine how a student is engaged and how you validate that in relationship to saying, these attendance requirements for the minimum school day have been met so that we can actually receive funding for this child. And I don't know how familiar your districts are with this, but apparently it says this is all about the waiver. How does the 2020-21 waiver of the 990 hour requirement impact schools with existing waiver agreements with USBE to conduct a 4-day week? So the document goes through all the questions related to this specific board rule, which is R277419, defines online competency-based and blended program as a learner-validated program. So it actually defines, it's related to this question about the difference between face-to-face courses and membership calculation, and then remote learning, and how remote learning then as a learner validated program would be documented so that schools can be funded. So I'm not going to go into details. It says, how will LEAs track student participation in the new COVID era? It depends on the LEA's instructional model and the system. So the reason these are important is that the board is very clear that based on COVID and the different areas in relationship to the positivity rate, which has been going down, but the epidemiologist has been very careful to talk about, a 3% positivity rate as a safe kind of environment. So it's really important that you understand that together the local LEA is working in a way based on your model and your approach and your reopening plan to ensure that every student and the average daily attendance is measured in a way so that you can get funding. So I don't know if you have any questions, because it ends up being, it's actually a kind of a long document and very detailed. But the reason it's detailed is because it does have to do with funding and the difference between remote learning and face-to-face learning and every LEA's individualized model, right? So it's important that you're familiar with it. So what questions do you have? We're open for questions. And if Evie can't get on, I'll just say some general things, but it's actually connected to this idea of support for students based on a digital divide, and if anybody would like to have a conversation about the way in which you supported as an LEA remote learning and the problem with digital access, this would be a great time to share what that experience was like. So is anybody willing to share? And maybe, I see Brenda Whitehorse is here from San Juan, and I just want to say that many of us understand the issues related to remote learning with our Navajo brothers and sisters, and it's really a huge challenge. So Annalise, you always have some interesting insights. Annalise has done some really interesting work with their kind of reconstructed ed equity department and our monitoring with Alpine. They ended up having a Title I distinguished school last year. So much of the work that they've been doing in Alpine has really focused on the issue of equity. So now's the opportunity for anyone to share their experiences with remote learning related to the minimum daily measurement for student engagement.
Good morning. Yes, this is Brenda Whitehorse. So our district is allowing, we have two regions in our district. We have our San Juan River schools and our Bajo Mountain schools. So our Bajo Mountain schools are Blanding and Monticello schools. And then the San Juan River schools are all the schools that are located near or on the reservation and Navajo reservation. So a lot of the parents in our surveys have chosen the option to do virtual learning on our San Juan River schools. So based on that information, we went 100% virtual learning for our schools that are on or near the reservation. And so it has brought up a lot of challenges, but we have a good team at San Juan School District that has addressed the IT concerns. They were able to set up various hotspots, and we're still working on improving the internet connection for all the students that are in those schools. And then the other problem was getting connected to Canvas and getting all our lessons in Canvas, and then learning the technology tools to use for the virtual learning, and then connecting that to for the Navajo language teachers, which I work with. we have been creating all of our lesson plans in Canvas with Navajo language and using tools like Screencast and Nearpod to interact with students. So we haven't started our school. Our first day is on Monday, on the 24th. So that's what's happening in San Juan.
Thanks, Brenda. We really appreciate your willingness to share. We know at some level, even though we don't really know the challenges in relationship to remote learning for San Juan. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your willingness to share with us. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think the biggest challenge in our area is just the rural areas, not having the internet connection, and working with cell phone companies and bringing internet services and hotspots to the areas that don't have connection, which has been, interesting. But like I said, we have an excellent IT team with San Juan School District and good leadership that has tried to think outside the box to get internet to those families.
Thank you so much, Brenda. Evie is on now. So Evie, we just kind of created this context for the 990 and then people using waivers to look at student engagement and the way in which you worked with your students, from the soft closure all the way through the summer. So if you could just kind of give us a way in which you really supported kids in connecting. We've heard many stories and we've seen the research in relationship to students as soon as things went virtual, that oftentimes they never checked in or they never got on Canvas, and then people tried to call. And so it was really, a challenge for everybody. So Evie, do you want to just tell a little bit about the context of your school and then kind of the support that you provided to engage the students?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I am Evie Farguson. I'm the assistant principal at Utah International Charter School here in Salt Lake, or in South Salt Lake. Basically, like everyone else, we did the soft closure in March. And once we recognized that the soft closure was going to be essentially remote learning for the rest of the fourth quarter, we began tracking who was doing the work without much problem and who was not doing the work, and then divided that group into who was not doing the work because of technical issues, who was not doing the work because they were intimidated by the process of not having a teacher there and just having a computer to kind of work with, and those who weren't doing the work because they didn't want to do the work and they knew they could do it they could do it again later on when there would be a teacher, or they just didn't want to do it. So we began tracking those distinctions. What we noticed, of course, was the most of the students did the work, and including the students who struggled in the in-person situation, right? We saw those students do incredibly well in the fourth quarter with the online process. But the distinction that we really worked on for much of the fourth quarter and the summer were those students who didn't do the work because they were intimidated by the process of online, and those who didn't do the work because they didn't want to. Those who didn't do the work because they didn't want to, we really engaged with them here as a school. And by we, I mean myself as the assistant principal, our counselor when she was around during the beginning of the summer, and our administrative staff. We really worked on contacting those students by phone, by Facebook and Instagram, by email, and on various occasions, I myself would go to the home to just encourage them to find out what is it about the online process that's it makes you not want to do it. and most of them really, because they knew they could do it. They knew they could do it. They knew they could do it in there wasn't like a deadline per se. There wasn't a daily deadline, and they knew they could just kind of crush it out in a week or a couple of weeks, everything all at once. And that information definitely informed us on what to do this semester in the fall. With the students who were intimidated, what we did was we really worked with them. Same group of people worked with the homes and the families and the students to really figure out what it is they were intimidated by. And essentially what we did was we allowed those students, if they needed the help, because some of it was just, I don't even know how to send an email. I don't even know how to upload a document. I don't know. So we allowed those students in a socially distanced format to come into the school to really, and we're, on a one-on-one situation here. And we had tutors and myself and others really work with those students to figure out, okay, here's how you send an email. Here's what it is. Let's practice. All right, now here's how you go to Google Classroom. Here's Google Hangout. Okay, now we're going to practice sending something to your teacher. Okay, so let's do that. And we took it step by step by step to the point where they felt like they could do it on their own, but also individually informing them that if you forgot, you can always come back to us. And it didn't have to be coming back in the building, but you can send us, you can call me. You can send us an email if you remember how to do that, but you can always call. All the students know how to call and send a chat on Facebook or Instagram to us. So even if it was that which they employed that function, then that's what we allowed. And essentially what we did was take it real slow. The soft closure was a shock in the system for everybody. And so we allowed this kind of space where this is new for all of us. We are all, myself included, the principal included, are going to make mistakes, and we're all learning as we go. And so we really learned as a community together. And we utilized the students, especially who were super tech savvy, who figured out how to do everything, who knew how to get all of this stuff down, and utilized them and the teachers who did the same to set up videos and tutorials online so that people could go to them and ask them how to do things. And they were very willing to do that, to kind of be the experts in their field that occasionally had gotten them in trouble in the classroom, doing all of these things on their phones, now allowed them to be and so that's what we did. And we also made some changes, such as, okay, this idea of having things due over a long period of time prevented those who were not interested from actually engaging in the work in a timely fashion. So what we've done is change the way we've set up a hybrid schedule this semester, so that, or for at least this semester, where students are in person one day and online the next day, in person the day after that, online the day after that. And so that allows the students to, what's due on Tuesday is due on Tuesday. It's not due 3 weeks from now. So there's not this kind of, I'll just hang out and do nothing for 2.5 weeks, and in the last 3 days turn everything in. Although that wasn't a large number of students, that was enough of a group of students for us to really change the way we're going to establish this second semester of some online learning. And we also utilized our teachers. I mean, we spoke to the teachers. We've been working very much so on flatlining the hierarchy here. On nobody's to blame for how this is working. We're all going to make mistakes. There's going to be changes. And everybody's learning from each other. So we flatlined the hierarchy, that myself as the assistant principal didn't know more than our reading teacher on some of these things. And so utilizing what the best practices were and having those people educate myself, educate their peers, educate the students on how things work. I mean, so we wanted also the teachers to feel equally as empowered in this process of what to do, how we're moving forward, what our plans are going to be in the future. They were equal parts of this from the moment we figured out, well, okay, we're probably going to have to do some distance learning in the fall. They have been a part of, all right, here's what we're thinking of as a plan. Do you agree? What are your comments on the plan? All right, we're going to set up another virtual meeting to discuss it. We've had subcommittees filled that are solely teachers to discuss what they noticed. So we are working on really, and have been working on flatlining a hierarchy where we are all considered equal here. And so far, it's, of course, we start school on Monday, but as the teachers, even today, as we're doing our professional developments, getting ready for remote learning, feel more confident going into it, certainly than they did in March, where there was just, all right, you have 2 days to get this together and we'll kind of figure it out as it goes. Now they feel more confident, more relaxed. They've been a part of the process of creating the plan. We've changed parts of the plan once there were things that became aware to myself and the principal that we didn't think about before, which was the point of having teachers involved. We're excited. We're excited to open on Monday.
Thanks, Evie. I'm hoping there will be questions. So if you have a question, you can put it in the chat. Katina asked about outside of the box. I think, this idea that Brenda's talked about, as well as Evie, in relationship to discovering what the barriers are from the students and the families, right? And then how to work together to solve those issues. We don't really understand the reasons why the learner isn't engaged, then it's really hard to figure out what's going on. Same thing with the family.
I could say one thing about that, Christelle, is that we didn't assume anything about the students. We were like, okay, why isn't a student engaged? And we went to that particular student to find out what's going on. And so when we found out that for some students, their families didn't have internet and didn't want an extra bill. So they didn't want anything that was going to cost, even if it was $10 a month, that the families were already struggling with paying the bills that they had. They didn't want another bill, as low as it may have been. We figured out a way to have that student schedule a time to come into the building or use the Wi-Fi that was available near their home to do the work that they could do. And the teachers worked with them also on that, and recognizing, okay, this student doesn't have internet access and they're not going to have it. But that's especially the case for our undocumented students who are terrified to have to show any kind of identity. They're like, nope, forget it. We don't want internet service. Okay, that's completely understandable. Let's figure out how we can get this done. And if they lived near a McDonald's, if they lived near a school building that had Wi-Fi, if they were willing to come here to the building where there is Wi-Fi, including sitting outside the building, if they didn't feel safe coming literally into the building, we worked with them, because I think it's important to understand that not everybody can have internet access, not because they don't. There aren't these affordable options available. It's not affordable for everybody. There's a fear of having to apply for things and put your name on a document. And so we were willing to, once we understood that, to work with those students and families to find an option for them that worked.
Great. So I think that responds to a couple of questions. And there's also I sent out yesterday, and so the curriculum directors, a new grant that was announced in relationship to internet access and hotspots for students. So being sensitive in relationship, it goes back to this idea of knowing who your learners, knowing who your students are, not making assumptions, knowing your families, understanding that all the adults in the learning community are learning together with the students and with each other, and that every perspective is valued in relationship to understanding how to adjust what you're thinking based on plans you're developing that might not necessarily be the most effective, right? I mean, that's the whole point of being an educator. Being an educator is learning every day and every moment for being inclusive as well as adaptable. You know, when I taught in South Central Los Angeles, our whole in the 80s. So, like Charlene, I've been doing equity work probably for about, I know I'm young looking, but for about 50 years. And it's always been a challenge, no matter where I was, whether it was in California or whether it's in Utah or whether it was in Massachusetts or wherever it is. So the question is, how do we create the openness to become a learning community with each other, right? Without being defensive or thinking that there's only one right way. I mean, you know, if you're a learner, all these multiple approaches to how we learn together is really precious. I mean, it's really important. So, Edie,
can I say something to that?
Yeah.
Estelle, I mean, what we've done here is we have been very open, and by we, I'm talking about myself and the principal, on admitting when we don't know. And saying, I don't know, and this is new, and we're all not going to know. And that's not just to the parents and the students, but also to our faculty. And inform them there are going to be things that you're going to know more than we do, and we just ask that you share it with us as a community, that we're a community here. And that has given the teachers an empowerment to understanding, too, that an administrator here at our school is not in any way better or knows more or anything than I mean, there is no blame on this situation, right? So we really have stressed this idea that teachers, and even in our professional developments, I mean, our professional developments are teacher-led. They are not administrator-led. So even this week of professional developments, getting ready for the school opening on Monday, although there have been things that we have had to lead, most of our work has been led by the teachers because they know more than myself and the principal on what works in the classroom under this situation, what worked for them in the summer and in the spring, and what didn't. So that's been a part of our process of really just admitting, I don't know, or you know what, I made a mistake when I did this. And we've been open on all of us, myself and the principal, including, on admitting that we were wrong about things and we made mistakes. So we're growing from that. You're muted, Christelle.
Now can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I think the whole meeting, if you think about kind of the theme of this, is working together, learning together. If things, there's no blame, right? So don't be worried about not being good enough or not competent enough, or like whatever story that, you know, we tend to go to. The best thing is to let that go and just, you know, I had a friend who used to say to me, and it was a tough situation. She'd be in DC and I'd be in California, and she'd get on the line and she said, "Oh, I saw you were online. I thought I'd call you and tell you today's going to be a great day because we're going to learn some things that we never thought we would learn before. And that friend of mine was Linda Darling Hammond, coming out of the Obama White House. So we're all learning, right? That's really the point. So I just want to thank you, Evie, and everybody who contributed to this meeting. Because it's recorded, it'll be great. It'll be on our playlist for everybody with all the resources, as well as the resources that were shared previously with Robin and Charlene, and also Christy from Weber. So on the agenda, it's a very clear link that you can email me personally, and we could set up, technical assistance that's more personalized. So if anyone has the last word, I'd be happy to hear it. I don't have to have the last word. If there's anyone who wants to say anything. We see a lot of thank yous. So it's a general feeling of gratitude. And
I'd say something if I don't need to have the last word either, but obviously I just came on, so it's kind of obnoxious that I would, but this is uncharted territory we're in, right? So we don't know what the answer is. None of us do. And so knowing that allows us to be more open to suggestions from even the students. We're going to be talking with the students on Monday on what worked for them and what didn't. So, we don't know. Nobody knows. And that's the thing, is that we don't know and no one else knows. So there's, knowing that allows us not to provide blame on anyone, and to recognize that we're going to learn a lot. Just like you said, we're going to learn a lot. And when the students come back, we're going to learn a ton from them and everyone else.
Thanks, Evie. So I'm just going to quote something which is an ancient text from Russia, believe it or not. It's a text called the Philokalia, which says, "Pilgrim, how do you make the path? You make the path by walking. Walk, pilgrim, walk." So I think that says it all. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate everything that you do. Take care, be safe, stay healthy for the kids and for your families.